The truth that couldn't be silenced. In the middle of a live congressional hearing, a white former attorney general looked Jasmine Crockett straight in the eye and told her to go back to Africa. The silence that followed wasn't shocked or stunned. It was calculated, terrifying, the kind of silence that signals something fundamental has shifted in the room. What Jasmine did next wasn't loud, but it was devastating. She didn't argue or raise her voice. Instead, she simply asked, "I'm sorry, what did you just say?" The question didn't fill the space. It emptied it, forcing everyone to confront what hung in the air. No echo, no murmuring, only the tense awareness of a room that had shifted from legal procedure to moral theater. Washington, D.C., Wednesday morning. The air outside was dry and sharp like a blade. Inside Capitol Hearing Room 4A, every seat had been filled since sunrise. Network crews, press reporters, and independent streamers positioned their cameras at the back, all pointed at two microphones in the center of the floor. This wasn't just any congressional session. It was a hearing on racial bias in America's criminal justice system. People hadn't come to listen. They came to witness whether justice in this country truly wore a blindfold or just turned its face away from certain skin tones. On the left side of the table sat Jasmine Crockett, a black congresswoman from Texas, former criminal defense attorney with over 100 courtroom victories. She wore a navy blue suit, sat upright like a steel rod, and held the gaze of the room like a conductor leading a symphony. She was the embodiment of a new wave in America, young, brilliant, and unafraid to confront the rot in the system with proof, not just passion. Across from her sat Pam Bondi, former Attorney General of Florida, blonde, composed, exuding the chill of courtroom confidence. Her career had been built on tough-on-crime policies, praised by conservatives, criticized by civil rights groups for racial disparities in prosecutions. Two women, two skin tones, two visions of America, and one burning question hanging in the air: does justice in America see color? The chairman offered brief remarks, then nodded toward Jasmine Crockett. She cleared her throat once, not out of nervousness, but focus. "Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Today I stand not as an adversary, but as a witness to a pattern we've all seen and too few have named. I hope we can examine not just statutes." She never got to finish. Pam Bondi leaned forward, voice smooth, surgical, and unmistakably loaded with contempt. "Maybe," she said, "instead of trying to teach America how to do justice, you should go back to Africa and study your own roots first." A young black aide turned his head. A woman in the gallery gasped, hand frozen halfway to her coffee cup. Someone whispered a curse under their breath. Jasmine did not flinch. She didn't recoil or raise her voice. She remained perfectly still, the kind of stillness that signals not confusion but control. Only her eyes moved, lifting slowly to settle on Pam Bondi. Calm and precise. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "What did you just say?" Pam rose from her chair with ceremonial calm. Her eyes moved across the room, past the cameras and representatives, locking onto Jasmine. "I said, if you think this country is so unjust, so broken, then maybe you should go back to Africa and fix that instead." The sentence didn't echo, not because it wasn't loud, but because it hit too fast, too hard, too directly. The air itself seemed to pause. Not silent from quiet, silence from tension. Jasmine didn't throw her hands up or demand order. She stayed still for a long moment, breathing calmly, eyes lowered slightly as if sorting through not just what to say but how to say it. Then she stood. The legs of her chair scraped quietly but loud enough to turn heads. She walked to the center of the room. Every pair of eyes followed her. "I was born in Texas," she said, her voice soft but traveling clear and full. "My father served in the United States military. He wore the uniform, followed orders, risked his life for this country. My mother was a nurse who never asked what her patient believed or what color they were. She just helped. That's what we were raised to do, to serve, to work hard, to believe in a place that has not always believed in us." She took a breath, and the room shifted. Some dropped their gaze, others leaned in closer. But my story doesn't start with them. It starts with the people who never got to tell theirs. My ancestors didn't book a flight here. They didn't come chasing the American dream. They were chained, shackled, torn from their homes, dragged across the Atlantic like cargo, packed into ships so tight they couldn't even stand. They were sold, branded, forced into labor on stolen land. And for generations, they were told they didn't count, not as citizens, not even as humans. There was no anger in her voice, just truth, heavy, grounded, real. After everything, they still believed in something better. They fought, they built, they gave birth to people like me, people who still believe in this country even when it forgets us. She turned her gaze directly toward Pam Bondi, her tone unchanged but her eyes sharpened, not with hate or rage, but with clarity. Cold, clear clarity. You want me to go back to Africa? Let me tell you something. I was here before you were born. My family's blood was in this soil before your family ever signed a mortgage. We were here before your laws let us vote, before your schools let us learn, before your sidewalks had our names carved into history. You look at me and see someone who doesn't belong, but I'm not the guest here. I'm the foundation. You don't get to ask me to leave a house that was built on the backs of my ancestors. Jasmine paused, not for applause, not for effect, but because the weight needed room to settle. So no, I'm not going back. I'm not leaving. I belong here, and I'm not the one who needs to be reminded of that. But Jasmine had just begun. Power fears proof more than passion. She didn't turn up the volume. She changed the evidence. She returned to her seat only long enough to reach for a plain black leather folder resting under her desk. The moment her hand pulled out the document, the energy in the room changed. It was thick, heavy, a pale gray cover with a red diagonal stamp across the front. Confidential, DOJ, Florida 2018. She walked it to the center, held it at waist height, and looked straight at Pam Bondi. No anger. No smile, just a cold, steady focus. Mrs. Bondi, I assume this looks familiar to you? This report was submitted to the U.S. Department of Justice in 2018 during your final year in office as Attorney General of Florida. She opened the folder slowly. Inside, pages dog-eared, highlighted, annotated. She knew it inside out, had read it more times than she wanted to admit. This document is not an opinion. It is not hearsay. It is not something I wrote. It is a federal analysis submitted under your administration investigating patterns of racial bias in the criminal prosecution system of your state. She turned to the first tab, her thumb brushing a chart taking up half the page, yellow highlight glaring beneath the lights. According to this internal analysis from the Florida Department of Justice, black defendants were recommended sentences that were on average 32% longer than white defendants for the same exact charges. Tori, don't forget to subscribe, and turn on the bell. She looked up, not dramatically, just directly, as if asking, can anyone explain that number for me? Same charge, same courtroom, same judge sometimes. But one person walks out with probation and another with years. She flipped to the next tab. A small red note stuck out. Prosecutors showed a documented pattern. That's the language here, of upgrading charges when the defendant's surname appeared to be African or Hispanic in origin. That means the only thing changing was the name. Not the evidence, not the facts, just the name. She turned another page, slower this time, the kind of slow that makes people hold their breath. Page 47, she said softly. Analysis of wrongful arrests across the state. 87% of them happened in predominantly black or Latino neighborhoods. 87%. Of those cases, less than 5% resulted in any formal apology. None, 0, resulted in financial restitution. The statistics were damning, the patterns undeniable. But what came next silenced even the most stubborn defender. And hey, she said, flipping to a tab page near the back, her thumb pausing on a paragraph highlighted in pale orange, is a direct quote from a memo written by your own senior legal advisor. With the same unshaken tone, she read, there's pressure from upper leadership to crack down harder on minority suspects, especially in election years, in order to maintain support from the base. The words hung there, thick and heavy. No one shuffled papers. No one whispered strategy. Even the camera seemed to slow, as if afraid of blinking. She closed the folder, the motion gentle, not a slam, not a flourish, just final. Her hands rested on top as she raised her head, gaze fixed on Pam Bondi. You told me I should go back to Africa. Maybe you should go back and read the document from the country you helped run. Justice doesn't come from slogans or speeches or spin. It doesn't come from being loud or from talking first. It comes from courage and from facing the truth, even when it's ugly, even when it's yours. The hearing ended, but the moment didn't, because some truths, once spoken, don't stay in the room. They move, they spread, and they don't ask for permission. By the time Jasmine stepped away from the podium, the video was already being clipped. A congressional aide with a phone had caught it, so had a reporter live streaming to 20,000 silent viewers. It spread like fire, not because it was loud, but because it was real. Real in a way that broke through politics, through partisanship, through the numbness of another news cycle. The clip was viewed 3 million times in the first 6 hours, 10 million by the end of the day. But it wasn't just the volume that made it matter. It was who was sharing it and why. A retired U.S. Marine posted the video with one line. This wasn't an argument. This was a bullet through every lie I was taught to believe about justice. A university professor tweeted a transcript with the caption, "Teaching this in class tomorrow. No notes. This is what courage looks like." And then there was a father, a white man in his early 40s, sitting in a small living room somewhere in Pennsylvania. He posted a video of himself watching Jasmine's speech with his son. The boy was maybe 12, eyes wide, hands still. When the clip ended, the boy looked at him and said, "She sounds like Grandpa when he talks about the war." The man choked up, turned to the camera and said, "I watched this with my son, and I'm proud that he cried." In barbershops in Atlanta, it played on TV. In classrooms in Detroit, it was discussed by students who'd never watched a congressional hearing in their lives. In diners in Oklahoma and gas stations in Ohio, people watched it over coffee, some nodding quietly, some shaking their heads, but watching, really watching. On cable news, the debate was no longer about whether the system was biased. It was about whether this hearing had just changed the conversation for good. Pam Bondi declined to appear. Her office released one line, "No comment at this time." In interviews, Jasmine said little. When asked what she felt when the clip went viral, she said, "I didn't say it for cameras. I said it because someone had to." And that's why it hit harder than most headlines ever could, because it wasn't designed for sound bites. It was a truth bomb dropped in a room built to contain polite lies, and it exploded. Not everyone left the room untouched. Some truths don't erupt, they erode, one quiet hour at a time. Pam Bondi sat alone in the back corner of the Capitol, far from bright lights and bold voices. She stared at the floor, the tile pattern of crisp black diamonds against white suddenly more complicated than she remembered. Her mind drifted to something she hadn't thought about in years. She was 22, in law school, broke, proud, and stupid. She'd parked in the wrong lot after hours, university property, no sticker, and inside the car, a bottle of wine half-finished from the night before. Campus security found it, called the police. She could have lost her clerkship, her internship, her shot. But she didn't because of Marcus Daniels, one of the only black students in her year. He'd seen her pacing, hands shaking. He knew one of the campus officers, talked to him, vouched for her. The whole thing disappeared. And Pam? She barely said thank you. Never asked Marcus why he helped her. Within a year, she'd forgotten it, or buried it in the flood of ambition and forward motion. Sitting there alone, she realized she had never returned the favor, never checked in, never even admitted to herself that someone else's grace had once saved a career before it started. What if this time I'm not right? The question wasn't loud, not even fully formed, but it was there. She'd built her career on strength, on being unshakable, but for the first time, the armor didn't fit. Jasmine hadn't yelled. That's what haunted her. She hadn't attacked. She just told the truth. And the worst part? It hadn't been cruel. It had been measured, precise, and devastating because Pam hadn't just been challenged. She'd been seen, truly seen, stripped of the title, the years, the rhetoric. She had been reduced to the hardest kind of reflection, herself. That night, at a beachfront home, Pam sat alone at her kitchen table, a forgotten mug of coffee beside her. Her laptop sat open, cursor blinking. She began to type, "Congresswoman Crockett, I don't expect forgiveness. I'm not sure I deserve it. But I want to say what I should have said in that room, what I should have remembered long before this week. We don't always notice the water we're swimming in until someone drains a pool. And this week, you drained it from me. There was a time when someone who looked like you stepped in and changed the entire direction of my life. And I forgot. I buried it. I never repaid it. You didn't humiliate me in that hearing. You didn't try to make me small. You held up a mirror, and for the first time, I saw the version of myself I've spent too long avoiding. This isn't a statement. This isn't something I wrote for the cameras. My team doesn't know I'm writing this. Maybe I'll never send it. Maybe I'm not supposed to. But if you ever read this, just know you were right. Not just in what you said, but in how you said it. She saved the draft but didn't send it. Not tonight. She wasn't ready to be forgiven, but she was ready to feel the weight of what she'd been a part of and what she could no longer ignore. If you enjoyed this, not every change starts in Washington. Some begin in quiet places, far from marble halls and microphones, like a classroom where the future learns how to see the present differently. Miss Lena Haywood stood near the front of her middle school classroom, remote in hand. The smart board showed a paused YouTube clip of Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett. The kids were unusually still. She clicked play. Jasmine's voice returned, steady and unhurried. Justice doesn't come from speeches. It comes from courage and from facing the truth, even when it's yours. The clip ended. Silence. A real one, not the we're waiting for class to end kind. A silence of processing, of hearing. A hand went up. It was Marcus, quiet, always in the third row. Is she in trouble for saying that? He asked. Miss Haywood looked at him carefully. No, she said. Not officially. But when people speak the truth like that, some folks make it hard for them. From the second row, Amaya raised her hand halfway. She didn't yell, she said. Miss Haywood nodded. No, she didn't. She could have, Amaya added, but she didn't. That's harder. The room went still again. Miss Haywood walked to the whiteboard and wrote in bold letters, Courage is not the volume of your voice. It's the weight of your truth. She turned back to the class. I want you all to think about what we saw. Not just what was said, but how it was said, the fact she brought, the way she stood her ground, and the way the room changed, not because she shouted, but because she refused to back down. The bell rang, but no one rushed the door. As they filtered out, Miss Haywood looked at the polls framed one last time. She thought of how many textbooks had skipped people like Jasmine. She thought of how many young minds had waited too long to hear someone like her speak. And then, in that quiet classroom in Mississippi, she closed the video, but she knew the conversation had only just begun. The story had played out in courtrooms and classrooms, on screens and sidewalks. But the real question wasn't about what was said. It was about what we took from it and what we do now. In the days that followed, the world didn't stop, but it slowed like a held breath not ready to be released. The news cycle spun as it always does. New scandals, new bills, new polls. But Jasmine Crockett's voice kept cutting through. It was as if the country, so used to deflection and denial, had stumbled into a mirror and finally stopped pretending it didn't recognize its own reflection. The human lesson wasn't subtle. Injustice doesn't arrive with fireworks. It arrives in small decisions. Sentencing memos, files buried in cabinets, a shrug at the word bias, a smile at the wrong joke, a silence when someone's dignity is stepped on. That's what made Jasmine's response so radical. Not that she spoke truth, but that she spoke it in a room designed to ignore it. That she carried the weight of history, hers, her ancestors, her communities, and placed it piece by piece on a table that had too long gone undisturbed. And what did she ask for in return? Not applause, not pity, just recognition. Recognition that justice without reflection is theater, that patriotism without accountability is vanity, that equality without memory is fiction. That's the tragedy and that's the hope, because what Jasmine exposed wasn't just a gap between word and action. It was the cost of that gap, measured not in headlines but in lives, in freedom denied, in time stolen, in families fractured by sentencing guidelines, by courtroom bias, by the cold, quiet racism of a neutral system. And yet, she stood there anyway. She didn't run. She didn't fold. She didn't ask to be protected. She asked to be heard. Systems don't change through shame. They change through reckoning, through the painful, public act of admitting what has always been true and daring to become something better. Jasmine's power wasn't in her anger. It was in her grace. Grace rooted in pain. Grace that didn't excuse, that didn't forget, but that chose to speak instead of scream. That chose truth over retaliation. That chose clarity over collapse. And now the weight of that reckoning doesn't sit on her shoulders anymore. It sits on ours. If Jasmine taught us anything, it's this: silence is never neutral. It's not a shield. It's not an escape. It's a choice. And it always favors the system that needs no defense. The room she stood in wasn't designed for voices like hers. It was built to absorb them, to dull their edges, to trap them in decorum and drown them in delay. But she refused. And that refusal cracked something open, not just in Congress, not just on social media, but in us. In every viewer who saw themselves in her stillness. In every listener who heard the unspoken question behind her words. If I can carry this truth into the fire, why won't you speak it in the safety of your home, your job, your school? You don't have to run for office to dismantle injustice. But you do have to show up. You don't need to be Jasmine, but you can stand with her. Because history won't remember who kept quiet. It will remember who stood up